Many Muslims today do not want to talk about subjects like chastity tests, claiming that Muslims have always condemned such tests. In reality, some past Muslim scholars were quite open to the permissibility of chastity tests. However, the last 20 years have seen a trend towards forbidding them categorically. In 2002, Islam QA provides a fatwa which permits a husband to request a chastity test. Here, he cites two Islam QAs. One is the exact same as the other, just the difference is one is in English and one is in Arabic. These sources do not agree with what he is saying. Instead, they give the permissibility for specific instances, and it is explained in the fatwa later on, which he then describes, in more detail as to why this would be permissible in one instance. He says, but in 2013, they revisit the issue and condemn the practice, limiting chastity testing to more of a narrow set of circumstances. And this is just false. What they do is explain the Islam QA above in more detail and tell you what those instances are for it to be permissible, and then explain that otherwise it's impermissible entirely. So he's been doing this for a couple of days, and this is another one of his tweets that are actually pretty horrendous. He says, Simp Fiqh lesson 457. Unlike Muslim women in the past, Muslim women today, basically generalizing all Muslim women, spend their time riding bucking broncos and dirt bikes over rough surfaces. Due to the rough riding habits of our modern sisters, none of them have hymens anymore. A'udhu billah. By the way, this is all supposed to be sarcastic, trying to replicate what simp fiqh would sound like. He says Muslim men need to recognize this social change and accept it. They should no longer expect to find hymens on the women they want to marry, even when such women are chosen because of their chastity and paid an increased meher. When men see no hymen on their wedding night, they should just remain quiet, never say anything, and assume that the wife probably destroyed her hymen while riding broncos and dirt bikes. Astaghfirullah. He then gets worse and says don't shame a Muslim girl just because she rode 10 to 20 or more broncos before marriage. Now, he posted a lot of tweets saying basically the same thing over and over again, like 10. I'm not going to show all of them, but this is nonsense. Now, I want to start with some verses from the Quran, from the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these verses were revealed in defense of Aisha radiallahu anha when she was slandered, when she was accused of things she did not do. In the Quran, chapter 24, verses 11 to 13, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Indeed, those who came up with that outrageous slander are a group of you. Do not think this is bad for you. Rather, it is good for you. They will be punished, each according to the share of their sin. As for their mastermind, he will suffer a tremendous punishment. If only the believing men and women thought well of one another when they heard this rumor, and said, this is clearly an outrageous slander. Why did they not produce 4 witnesses? Now that they have failed to produce witnesses, they are liars in the sight of Allah. Do you want to be one of those liars in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? You're just going to accuse a woman that she's basically been sleeping around, and that the only way to prove that this isn't the case is by her going to get examined by a doctor. Now, here is the fatwa from the scholars explaining why this particular thing is impermissible, unless for specific reasons, which we will see. It says it is not permissible for the husband to go to a doctor to confirm chastity of his bride because it reflects suspicion, invades people's privacy, and is prohibited by Sharia. And there has been a severe punishment that has been warned against it. Furthermore, this action involves unnecessary exposure of intimate matters without necessity, making it a forbidden act. They also say it's important to note that the absence of a hymen is not evidence for a woman's immorality. And then they give many reasons on why the hymen can break when it is established that it is not permissible for a man to engage in this act. It is also established that it is not permissible for a woman to go to a doctor to go and check for her chastity and obtain a certificate, as some people do. And again, this is because this constitutes unnecessary exposure of intimate matters without necessity. However, there is an exception if there are accusations or suspicions or an assault that a woman needs to clear. and only if this is the only way to prove her innocence in the matter. Now, the Standing Committee for Issuing Fatwas is also cited here. And this is not just one scholar, this is a bunch of scholars signing off on a particular thing when they issue a fatwa. And they were asked about the permissibility of a chastity test. And they said it is permissible if there is a legitimate reason, such as allegations that a woman is aimed to clear, or an accused person in a case of an assault. Otherwise, it is not permissible. They also asked in this fatwa for another sheikh to give their opinion on this topic. Sheikh Abdul Rahman bin Nasr said this: "May Allah condemn this method. This is reprehensible behavior," speaking about when the husband takes the wife to get her chastity checked. It is not permissible for the doctor to examine or for him to inform him of anything. If it is absolutely necessary for the doctor to respond to the husband, the doctor should say, "I don't know," even if he knows. In another fatwa, it is said that a woman had committed zina with another man, and then she grew up, and in her later years she found another man, and she asked, "Do I have to tell him about this?" The fatwa says, if the husband does not find out about this after marriage and Allah conceals it for her, then she should continue as she is. If he finds out that her hymen had been broken, she can hint that it was the result of some accident or some such thing. So she doesn't even have to expose herself to her husband. If he hasn't found out and she regrets it and she repented, she can keep it to herself unless he finds out, and then he can do what he wants with that later on. In another fatwa from the same sources he keeps using, it says it is not permissible for the husband to doubt his wife's chastity just because she does not bleed on their first night together. Because the fact that there is no bleeding does not mean she is not chaste, just as the presence of bleeding does not mean she is chaste. I can go on and on. There's like 20 fatwas that all agree with the position that this is not permissible. Wow, look at him defending the women. What a simp. He's just like the compassionate imams. I'm using the scholars. I don't care what you have to say. I'm using the Quran, the Sunnah, the Salaf, the scholars. What are you using? What are you, a liberal? Your emotions matter more? I don't care about your emotions. You can be upset that you're not allowed to do this. It doesn't matter. No one cares. It is absolutely fine. It's permissible. It's acceptable. It's from the Sunnah to want a partner that is chaste. There's nothing wrong with this. But once the partner tells you that they have not slept around, you can't go, "Oh yeah, well you need to provide me with a certificate from a doctor to prove this." What? This is accusation. You're basically accusing the person that they have slept around and you don't believe them unless they show you. This is not okay. This feels like an insanely red pill topic, and there's nothing from the Quran and Sunnah that says you need to get a virginity test. There's nothing. Find me one thing. I want to see the proof from the Quran and Sunnah that says you need to get a virginity test for a woman, that it's an obligation, that it's mandatory, that it's recommended. There's nothing.
He says a woman got divorced after wedding night because she did not bleed. Her husband accused her of zina, but she never did wrong in her life. There is a tradition of putting white cloth on bed to check the bride bleed or not. What does Islam say about this? This is outrageous. This is disgusting. This has no relationship with Islam, none whatsoever. No man with honor and dignity would ever think of doing something heinous like this. Even animals don't do things like this. The hymen of a woman is not always broken at the wedding night. Sometimes it takes a week, sometimes it takes more. Sometimes it breaks without bleeding. Most of women don't have it because of the physical sports they do, riding bicycles, running, jumping. So to have the audacity to accuse a pure, innocent woman of zina just because of your failure to intellectually think like a real man,